Hello, everyone. Welcome to What's Next? New Ways of Engaging Jewish Text. Each week during this series, we've been bringing you different ways that we at JTS have been connecting with text and textual traditions. This one is a very different and interesting session that we have for you today. Generally, we have faculty, staff, or colleagues from JTS who are presenting, and today we are delighted to share a new partnership, or newer, with Romemu, which is a synagogue here that has both physical locations in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and then also has has a virtual presence. And their offices are now in the JTS building. And one of the great things about this is that our staff and students have been able to engage with Rabbi David Ingber, who has been sharing his teachings with them. And we thought it would be such an amazing opportunity to be able to have that same sort of teaching come to our virtual audience. So I'm really excited to be able to share Rabbi Ingber's teaching with you, specifically as we're leading into Purim. And this week, we're going to be exploring the kind of mystery and hidden elements of Purim, and I'm very excited to see how he directs all of these varied sources into a kind of a cohesive narrative. If you're interested in the whole series and the videos of past sessions, my colleague Tani Schwartz-Herman will post those in the chat. I want to thank you all for being part of this community and for your ongoing support for the Center for Lifelong Learning. Special welcome to people who are joining us for the first time. Thanks to everyone who's donated in the past to support this kind of programming. If you're interested, we have sponsorship opportunities available for these sessions, and we'd love it if you could sponsor a session. There are 3 levels, and again, my fabulous colleague Tani will post some information about that in the chat. And today I want to jump into our program. It's called The Masks of Doubt, Exploring Purim, Uncertainty, and the Hidden Divide. And I think Purim famously, God is not mentioned in the Megillah, and it's not a holiday that we associate. It's very much about human interactions and human endeavor. And so I'm really intrigued to see how we find the divine presence in that. With us today, we have Rabbi David Ingber. He's the founding rabbi of Romemu and senior director of Jewish Life and the Bronfman Center at the 92 NY. David, did I mess that up entirely?
No, you can say 92nd Street Y. It's still
It's so hard to
it's like Yaakov and Yisrael, even after his name Yisrael, you could still it's the same thing. Yeah.
Romemu is the largest renewal synagogue in the United States. And Rabbi Ingber has been named by Newsweek as one of the top 50 most influential rabbis in the United States, and by the Forward as one of the 50 most newsworthy and notable Jews in America. So I am delighted to get his take on this holiday and getting us prepared for what is to come. If you have technical questions, you're going to chat my colleague Tani. And if you have Q&A for Rabbi Ingber, we're going to be doing Q&A a couple of times, once in the middle and once at the end, and I'll be sharing your questions with him. So please send those to me. And we will be sharing Rabbi Ingber's sources in the chat, and he'll also be sharing them on the screen. So thank you so much. And without further ado, I turn it over to Rabbi.
Thank you so much. Really, it's great to learn Torah with all of you. And I just came from another class, and I'm thrilled to be sitting and learning Torah, and lucky to be able to sit and learn Torah with all of you. I see some colleagues, and I see my friend Neil and some other people, and Asher Chaim. So good to see friends. And those of you I've never met before, I feel really honored that you have time, to learn Torah in the middle of your day, wherever you are, to sit in and listen. And it's really Ashreinu Matov Chalkeinu Mana'im Goraleinu. It's really, really we're lucky to learn together. I'm excited to share some ideas with all of you. And I kind of just a little background here is that at Romemu, at the community that I founded back in 2008, we also, like almost all of you in your synagogues around the country, have like a parsha study, a study of the week, that kind of thing, and we also have a large group, and it's very interactive. And so I'm hoping that that I'll be able to stop and or take some of the questions that come up. Um, I also want to say before I really share the screen and start looking at the text together that rabbis today are very blessed by having other colleagues who've done great work and who use Safaria and other sources to put great sources together and source sheets together. And so I'll be sharing sources. Some, many of them are sources that are well known. Some of them were curated by various rabbis on Safaria, like Rabbi Aubrey Glazer and others who've put beautiful source sheets together. And so I think that it's really important to give that credit, although it's not on the sheet itself, but to just want you to know that even though we'll be talking about things hidden and concealed, that might be hidden, but I want to reveal it and say that it's we're all standing together in trying to understand the nature of Purim and the nature of our holidays together in our sacred texts. And I guess lastly, I'll just say that um, I love Purim. I love Purim, and I'm fascinated by it. I think between Purim and Hanukkah, these two chagim that seem to be an expression of our agency as Jews, adding holidays to the sacred canon, right? The sacred biblical canon, adding our own holidays, our own chagim is really incredibly audacious and speaks to the the desire that God has, as it were, to partner with us in creating a holy world. And so Purim has always been, a very interesting chag. It's a very interesting holiday. I grew up as an Orthodox kid in Long Island, and Purim was kind of that weird holiday with the groggers, and everybody had funky groggers. Some people had, everybody wanted to one up one another on which grogger you had, and I think when I became a young yeshiva student in Israel in 1987, it's the first time that I really began to explore the mystical and otherworldly dimension of Purim and how it shows up in our sources in ways that are completely undercut, I think, the more typical understanding of Purim as just kind of like Mardi Gras Day, this kind of this sense of like, oh, it's just a day to let loose. And some of the sources in our tradition seem to point to a much deeper dimension around Purim. And so let's start. Can everybody, first of all, can you see the screen? Those who have cameras that I can see your thumbs, give me a thumbs up if you can see it. All good? And the size of the screen also, it's okay. It's not too
If
small.
you could
A
maybe
little bit
make it a
bigger?
little bigger, I think it might
Sure.
be good.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I think I do this. Does that make it bigger? Better? Awesome. Thank you, Ellie. So the, we're familiar. I think almost all of us are. Hopefully, all of us are familiar with the Purim story, right? It's the name itself, Purim, from the word pur, which is a goral. It's a kind of lottery, right? It's the name of the Megillah is named for this kind of random quality that seems to be at the heart of the Purim story. But where we're introduced to, like, looking through the lens of uncertainty and doubt, a lack of solidity. We look at the way that Esther is a character. We're going to look at Esther, and then we'll look at Haman. We'll look at the Amalek, and then we'll look at a number of other features that kind of underscore the centrality of doubt and uncertainty, both as a problem and also as a solution. We would say that doubt is and uncertainty is both a problem and it's also a solution, right? It's the thing that we are not supposed to have, and the thing that we can't not have, and that we must have all at once. It's kind of its thing and its opposite, which is also a theme in Purim. Its thing and its opposite. So looking at the first source number one, Esther herself is shrouded both in the way that she's introduced and the way that the tradition eventually sees her is itself the beginning, let's say the first foray into something concealed, something not as it appears, something that has a dual valence to it. So source number one, Lohigida Esther es ama ves moladeta. Esther does not reveal. It's also interesting that it's Lohigida, the word lahagid. It appears twice in this verse. That word, of course, is instrumental in understanding Jewish history, right? The Haggadah, the Gata Lebincha. that you are to tell over and make a Haggadah. So something here in the text, intertextually with other texts, Lo Higida Esther. Esther does not, right, say what her nation is and where she was born. For Mordechai, ki Mordechai tziva leha shelo tagid, and Mordechai has commanded her not to tell, not to reveal, not to speak it, right? What Esther is introduced, right, to us earlier than that in verse 7, that she is not only Esther, she is Hadassah. Vahi omenet Hadassah in source number 2 here, that Mordechai was the omen, or the omenity was the foster father, nursemaid or nurse of Hadassah. He Esther. She's got two names, right? The artist formerly known as Esther is also Hadassah. Hadassah is Esther. Esther is Hadassah. Ki ein la avein. She doesn't have parents. She doesn't have a father or a mother. V'hanara yefat to'ar v'tovat mar'eh. And she's beautiful of form. She's beautiful to look at. Uvamos avia v'ima lekacha Mordechai lo labas. And when excuse my Ashkenazi pronunciation, it's kind of just my where I grew up, and it's not, I'm equal opportunity in terms of my accents. I love them both. Uvamot avia v'ima lekacha Mordechai lo lavat. And when her father and mother have died, Mordechai takes her as a bat, as his own daughter. We don't know who Esther is. Is she Hadassah? Is she Esther? She's both. She doesn't have parents, but she has Mordechai. So everything about her is the, who is she? Which one is she? More than one name. She's got she has her parents have died and she's been taken in by Mordechai. We begin with kind of an Esther who is concealing who she is, and even the text to some extent doesn't give us the name of her father, the name of her mother, right? We don't know, a woman who has two names, but what the text doesn't want to tell us the names of her parents. And, we're slip sliding away, as it were. And the rabbis, of course, in the Talmud, they are enraptured by Esther's name. Like in a part of the, if source 3, the Gemara in Chulin, the Talmud in Chulin 139b, in a remarkable section of Talmudic inquiry, trying to find references and inferences to biblical characters in allusions to their name in the biblical text, right? Later biblical characters, especially right they'll try to find all three of the main characters of the book, except Achashverosh, right? We have Mordechai, Haman, and Esther. All three of them, the rabbis are going to try to find where in the Torah they were alluded to, like where's a hint to them. And so this, I think to some of you might be quite well known, but it's still remarkable. Esther min Torah minayin. The Talmud says, where do we know Esther from the Torah? That question itself is an amazing question, right? How do we know Esther from the Torah? Right? Where in the Torah can you find an allusion to the events involving Esther? And so they quote Devarim Lamed Aleph Yudchet, the Deuteronomy chapter 31:18. Ve'anochi haster astir. Right? God says, and on that day, haster astir, I will surely hide my face. The fuller context of the verse, if you look at source 4, V'anochi haster astir panai v'yamahu, and on that day I will surely, yes, I will like double, I will conceal my face, I will hide it. Al kol ra'ah sh'asa, right, against all of the evil that they have done. Kifana el Elohim achirim, for they have turned to other gods. The rabbis see what later becomes known as the doctrine, the theological idea of Hester Panim, that God's face is hidden. They say that Esther's name is alluded to in God's own hiding of God's face. Astir, right? To play on that, lahastir. By the way, parenthetically, just a little before we even get into Chassidus, into Chassidut, the study of Hasidic literature, The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, had an interpretation of this verse from Deuteronomy, where God says, "I will hastir, I'll doubly hide my face, or I will surely hide my face." It's probably the repetition is to create emphasis. But the Baal Shem Tov said famously that the double concealment is the worst curse imaginable. It's not that when someone hides, but you know that they're hidden, at least you go looking for them. And the Baal Shem Tov said that when there's a double concealment, meaning you don't even know that something is missing, and so you don't look. And so the Baal Shem Tov said that it's the analogy would be to somebody playing hide and seek, and God hides, and then nobody comes to seek because hastir, there's a double concealment. In any event, this beautiful Talmudic, invitation to sing Esther as as hidden, right? That her name is the one who conceals her own name. Her name itself means concealed one to the rabbis, which is itself amazing to think about, because of course it's no longer concealed if the name is concealment, it's essentially look here, right? Her name is look here, right? But it's certainly in holding these two pieces, right? The name Hadassah, the name Esther, the rabbis saying that her name, she doesn't tell anyone her real name, right? Or what her true identity is. And that in some way, when trying to find where Esther is located in the Torah, the rabbis in Chulin say that in some sense, she is an expression of the hidden divine. Like just as God said, I will hide myself, I will also hide myself on Purim. I will hide myself in full view. Look at source number 5, which is interesting, kind of unpacks what we just said in clear language. Ancient Hebrew texts love a good play on words. According to the story of Purim, Esther's given name was Hadassah. The name Esther, which she took to conceal her identity as a Jew before marrying the king, which, by the way, that's not what it says. It doesn't say that she took that name in order to conceal her identity, but okay, her name is concealed. It may be related to the Old Persian stara, meaning star. Other scholars suggest Esther comes from Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess of love, or Ashtarte, some others people say. Multiple meanings are possible, and the Talmud states that Esther's name is connected to the Hebrew word astir, I will hide. The rabbis of the Talmud see this not only as a description of Esther's act of self-preservation, but as a key to understanding God's apparent absence in this story. This is from the book Masking and Unmasking Ourselves. The scroll of Esther is all about revealing and concealing. On the deepest theological level, even God is concealed. God's name is never mentioned. But ironically, however, the rabbis who stress that the very name of Esther reveals God's absence, applying God's own promise to Moses prior to his death. The circumstances alluded to in this verse from Deuteronomy are applied to the days of Esther and Mordechai, perhaps implying God's abandonment of the Jewish people and their eventual destruction. Similarly, much of what is apparent on the surface of the narrative masks a different reality. This masking of a different reality, right, to take issue with Cohen's assertion, it could be seen, of course, that God's hidden face, right, Esther represents the abandonment of the Jewish people to, right, to history, or to genocidal intentions of the antagonist in Haman. But it could also be, of course, that the invitation to see Esther, at least theologically from the rabbi's perspective, is that God is no longer hidden when we realize that God is hidden. That somehow the uncertainty of God's presence is actually paradoxically lessened when we know where to look, or when we are in the face of, right, a name like Esther, saying like Esther is hidden. And so it's almost like the text is saying, look, Esther is the mask, but the name of the mask is hiddenness or uncertainty. And that somehow looking at God's absence is also to locate God's presence, if that makes sense. that there is something profoundly paradoxical here, right? If we really wanted God to be hidden in the text, then don't name her Esther. Keep her name as Hadassah, right? But something here is that the thing and its opposite are held in tension in Esther's very name. The word Hadassah also, by the way, just another little parenthetical note, that Hadassah, of course, like the myrtle branch, right? One of the things about the myrtle branch is that each of the three kind of the cluster of three leaves are supposed to cover over the branch itself. That's a kosher Hadassah. And there's something about her cover up, which is um is itself the way into understanding, right, this story. Like, another way of saying this is that God is no longer visible, at like in the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus, Egypt, but there are clues everywhere, and that one of them is that uncertainty or doubt can lead one to begin looking for the hidden divine, or that which is beyond the mask. If you look at source number 7, this is Isaac Sender, who in his commentary on the prayer Al Anisim writes, masquerading also alludes to the miracle of Purim, which was masked within the laws of nature. Even the name of the Megillah and its heroine Esther allude to what is hidden or masked. Right? Someone once said, by the way, the word Megillah it can also be read playfully as legalot, to reveal Esther, to reveal the hidden thing. Right? The Gemara asks, where is Esther's name alluded to in the Torah? And the answer given is that it is alluded to in the verse, right? I will surely hide my face. And this is the reason he says we wear masks, to emphasize the symbolism of camouflage, right? That camouflage, right, is is uh, is rooted in God's own camouflage, right? Nature, as the Kabbalists point out, the early Kabbalists make a play on the word teva, nature. And they say that the word teva, and they then say the nature, because they had to kind of make it work. Ha teva is the same numerical value as the word Elohim, the God name Elohim. That the nature is the same numerically and therefore conceptually to God. God's skin is nature, someone once said to me. That we look for God in the natural and not the supernatural. And in that way, maybe it's even more remarkable that God is no longer visible, but God is more ubiquitous in that way, not outside of nature, but also within all of what we call the natural order of things. Nachmanides called these nisim nistarim, hidden miracles, hidden miracles. And we said that too in our prayers, for all of the miracles that are with us each and every day, Erev, Avoker, V'Tzarayim, right, in the liturgy. So the rising of the breath, the ability to, the body and its workings, we see these things also as quote unquote manifestations of a God who is no longer acting in 10 plague, and Charlton Heston pyrotechnics, but in the very workings of the moment to moment and in reality, right? How do you find courage and inspiration when what normally gives you strength or joy appears to be absent is a good question to ask ourselves, right? When we begin to, when something is hidden from us, or when the, like, when with object relations, when a parent is no longer visible, but now we've internalized the parent, so that when the parent leaves the room, the child, it doesn't go into, right, paroxysms of doubt. Will you ever come back? Right? There is something in a way to see here as an evolution, and that Hastarat Panim, God's hidden face, is actually a greater level of divine presence in a way, because it isn't something supernatural, something beyond that stands out. And the way in, of course, is through doubt, doubting the surface of things, doubting the story that we've been told. There's something in all mystical and esoteric wisdom that doubts the story as it's being given to us and looks for clues for something hidden. In source number 9, this also relates, of course, to the role I'm going to read 9 and 10 together before we move to Haman. And maybe we'll take a break actually between that and Haman. Um, I know I can hear you all booing when I said that. So, okay, source number 9. On Purim, Jews dress up and wear masks that change faces etched in pain and suffering into joy and frivolity. On the surface, it seems that Purim involves an escape from reality, one moment in which we can mask the pain and difficulties we experience and don fanciful carnival masks and costumes. Yet we may ask what lies beneath the story that intimates the absence of God and meaning, and the holiday of Purim, which is about frivolity and play. Underneath the garment of the story, love that he did that there. Underneath the garment of the story, is perhaps a glimpse of the existence of a force in the universe that can help us move beyond who we are and what our lives presently are, and enable us to become whom we aspire to be. What may be necessary is for us to recognize that, unlike the Exodus story, in which God is recognized through redemptive miracles, the Purim story demands that we come to recognize the presence of the divine through the ability to hear the hidden voice of God. The redemptive paradigm of Esther is to see the camouflage divine in the darkness of our lives. And then Dr. Panina Feller also, I love this because I really believe she's working with Cohen to really ask the question that is animating today's class. Purim invites us to set aside a time in which we completely reverse our wardrobe, which in turn reverses our identity. It's an invitation to cross and reverse all the other dichotomies and uniforms in our lives as well. On Purim, we are using clothes against themselves to deny their power to box us in and simultaneously to redeem us from needing redemption. Purim makes us wonder if there is an authentic self at all, or whether it is all just endless masks upon masks. I tell you, I definitely didn't think about that in Great Neck growing up in Great Neck Synagogue when we were having Purim. I wasn't thinking to myself, oh, Purim is using clothing against itself or garments against themselves in order to ask the subversive questions of all the categories, right, that we live within and box ourselves in by, that we live by, that we need to live by, but that in some way can become not clear categories, but become prisons of sorts. And in some way, Purim becomes redemptive, not by inviting an external divine character to show up, but in the very act of being able to wear different masks, to play within the different places of certainty, and to bring a deep level of suspicion to those certainties, to that vadaut, to that knowing, right? Vadai, something is vadai, something is absolutely true. And Purim says, well, maybe not. In this way, the Baal Shem Tov, I just want to say the last thing, and then I guess I'll open this up. The Baal Shem Tov famously taught that the first 4 letters of the Hebrew alphabet tell a lot of different teachings, a lot of different stories. But the one that he wanted to tell was about the second, third, and fourth letters, Bet Gimel Daled. He said the Aleph is the pure unity, like the uniform, the one form, which is God's essence, right? The Aleph is Alufo Shel Olam, the Prince of the world, the Master of the world. Aleph is right the hidden aspirant letter, but also right. It represents unity. We don't begin the Torah with an Aleph; we begin it with a Bet, right? And the second, third, and fourth letter is Bet Gimel Dalet spell the word Beged, which is a garment. Beged. And that the world, as it were, is not only God's home, but also God's clothing. But clothing can become so essentialized that it is boged. The second, third, and fourth letters, they spell the word traitor. Boged, to be a traitor to that which is deceptive. Then when we come to see the world, right, only as, you know, or the garment, right, then we lose a sense of what's hidden. It's all masks, and we no longer, as it were, find that other story that's underneath it. And so just in looking at Esther alone, and we'll get to Haman and Amalek in a moment, we have like this real profound invitation to unsettle some of our fixed notions of what is hidden and what is revealed, and the role of doubt in being able to gently, you know, decenter and destabilize some of the things that need to be destabilized so that we might arrive at something a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit deeper. So are there any questions? I kind of wanted to open it up at this moment. Ellie, I don't know if
Oh,
you
we
received.
have a lot of, you're bringing in all sorts of pop culture references for people. So, for instance, we got that RuPaul, which I believe this might be the first reference to RuPaul in a JTS webinar, says we're all born naked, everything else is drag, which I think goes to your masks and masks and masks comment. You can certainly pull in RuPaul in your next source sheet here.
Okay, great.
Um, and
Just so
then
you know, I maybe didn't even, it's like, like there's this saying that misnabe ve'eno like that I was saying something that I didn't realize what I was saying, like Abraham, when he says we're coming back from the mountain. I didn't know that as a RuPaul, but thank you so much for sourcing that. That's awesome.
we can add to and just how many different ways in which the text uses kind of garments and costumes, and both in what Vashti refuses to unclothe, and this sackcloth of fasting and the getting robed up, that it is such an intrinsic part of the text itself, that the masking and the physical covering is such an important piece of that. I had one question. Please explain how Purim redeems us from needing redemption. So if you could maybe, because that actually I think is a challenging concept, and I'd love to hear more.
So let's wait till we get to the end, and then we'll come back to that, because it speaks again to the notion that the thing in itself, that if you follow something far enough, it can bring you back, right? Because the need for redemption is rooted in a certain worldview that maybe Purim, for at least one or a few days a year, wants to unsettle, even as it leaves it in place. But let's come back to at the end at about, 15 or so,
Um,
20 minutes.
yeah, yeah. I think just in terms of the idea of, this is a question for me, the idea that this, and I know it's not explained, but do you have a kind of drosh on why Esther would be Esther and Hadassah? Why the two names? I think two names are, in literature, not just biblical literature, is an ongoing, that there's, you're named and then twice named, and something more comes from that second name. Do you have any sense of power, or that in the withheld name, and any sense of power in the name that she shares?
It is interesting, and I think that there's something about Hadassah that is, could be that Hadassah is her Hebrew name, right? There's Safnat Paneach and there's Yosef, right? Yosef and then Safnat Paneach. It could be that Esther is her, again, that's her kind of her spy, her name as a spy, but Hadassah is a name that is deeply connected to the tenderness between her and Mordechai, right? It says, V'hu omein et Hadassah, he Esther, which is almost like the text is revealing that she had another name before she became this, this double secret agent for the Jewish people. And what's lost potentially is Hadassah, right? The Hadassah element is really poignant. Hadassah again, uh, it's just like the image of Hadassim and what Hadassah might have meant is also very powerful. Um, it's interesting that Mordechai in the rabbinic tradition is also connected to the olfactory sense, right? Hadassim and also are very connected to the olfactory. And in the Gemara, when the Gemara asks, where do we know Mordechai's name from the Torah, it says that his name is connected to one of the incense, to the myrrh, Maradachia. It's like, so I don't know why there is this overarching theme of smelling. Maybe smelling has to do with memory. And there's something about the Purim story, which is that something is remembered for her. She had to recall her Jewish identity. It was in danger of being lost. I don't know. I think it's a great question. Great question.
Well, and your this is so far not just resonated in terms of making us think of RuPaul, it also made another participant think of the Billy Joel song "The Stranger," in which it says, "We all have a face that we hide away forever, and we take them out and show ourselves when everyone has gone." So just know that you're ripe with pop culture references with
That's
this.
great.
So let's keep moving because I know there's a lot more to go, and I definitely want to get to Haman, and I'll let everyone say boo with me right now, and then we can.
Well, it shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, I think that again, like these questions for reflection here about masks that we wear, because there is like again, there is something about masks that, the Oscar Wilde quote at the top of the source sheet. There's some there's something about wearing a mask also for people that isn't a hiding, but actually a strengthening of a certain part of their identity or an ability to use that mask to tell the truth, right? That needing cover, right? We have masks, when this week's Torah portion, when Moshe will come down from the mountain and he'll have to put on a mask because the light of his face is too intense, right? So he wears a masveh, right? There is something about the power of a covering and a mask that is both necessary, but also it can become, you know, a way of hiding. Like if we stop for a moment, not to only think about the usage of clothing in the story of the book of Esther, but we also the first appearance of clothing in the Torah, which I decided not to bring here, but that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, right? So the story, of course, is about eating from this tree, and immediately we see the story of being naked, of being Romemu, which is of course playfully linguistically connected to being crooked like the snake, and they wake up and they know that they're like right that Romemu, that we're naked, and God then says, who told you? Mi higid lecha? And that question, of course, it's an intense question because of course God knows, and the rhetorical question hangs in the air because there's a way that even God's feigning uncertainty that speaks to the uncertainty that arises, at least this is the way the rabbis think about it, that there is, in the aftermath of that story, there is great uncertainty that enters the world, right? What was good and evil and clear now has been in some way diluted. And it's also reflected in now the need to wear clothing. There's an awareness of inside and outside. The very first garments in our tradition are the garments worn after, right, eating from this tree, ingesting that knowledge. And so, like, clothing here serves the purpose of also protecting and concealing and revealing all at once. And so it's like the very thing that the thing in its opposite. It's both and, it's not either or, right? And in the story, the garments that conceal Esther's identity are also what gives her the power to finally say about Tilbash Esther Malchut. She puts on, right, the garments of royalty. She has the power now to reveal herself in some way. So we're going to move into like doubt as a fundamental element of the Amalek phenomenon, how Amalek plays into this. And this is what I said. There is doubt that is good doubt, and there's doubt that is dangerous doubt. So if you look at source number 13, can you see source 13? This passage that we read just this past Shabbat, Zachor et asher asad lech Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you, but derech b'tzeitchem mitzrayim, when you were on the way out of Egypt. Asher korcha b'derech, they happened upon you, right, along the way. Vayizad neiv b'cha kol nechashalim acharecha, and they kind of, I don't know, they attacked, they like a tail, they attacked those who were stragglers behind you. And vata yefi agea, you were tired and exhausted, and v'lo yarei Elohim, um, and were not, I guess, they were not deterred by the fear of God. And when God will give you space, like when you'll be given space, you'll be given safety from all your enemies around you in the land that God will give you. Erase the memory of Amalek from underneath the heavens. Lo tishkach, do not forget. This is a asher korcha b'derech, right? This piece here that in my original was highlighted, that you were they happened upon you, right? They happened upon you. There's something about in the rabbinic tradition that happening upon us was a cooling down of certainty. There is the notion that the word korcha here in the Midrash, that they happened upon you from the word, right, makoreh, a happening, a mikre, is also from the word kar, which is cold. And in the rabbinic imagination, we were clear, right? We had just come out of Egypt. We had miracles, supernatural miracles. And along comes Amalek, along comes this foe, and they cool us down, says the Midrash. They inject levels of uncertainty, like doubts and questions, into our certainty. Um, but what's amazing, of course, is that we really don't know, if Amalek had the role of cooling us down and injecting that vada'ut, that certainty with uncertainty. Amalek itself, the identity of Amalek is also uncertain. We really don't know who Amalek is. So if you look at source number 14, right, though a lot of people behave like Amalek, no one knows exactly who Amalek is nowadays. And besides, it would be impolite to go around wiping people out, even if it is biblically ordained. I suspect the police wouldn't care too much for it either. So this commandment is somewhat in abeyance. And thus it falls to the sofer, the scribe, to carry out this mitzvah symbolically. There is an opinion, the Kav Yashar recounts how the Gaon, the Rav Heschel of Krakow, would test his quill by writing Amalek or Haman, and the idea became a custom, a minhag. So a small scrap of kosher cloth, kosher scroll, or right, parchment is taken. The sofer, the scribe, will write the word and then crosses it out with 3 diagonal lines. And this is indeed a neat way to test a new quill. One doesn't really care about this word, so it doesn't matter if the quill isn't any good and it gets messed up, right? We're not sure if you're allowed to do this or not, but all of it becomes part of the mystery of Aman and Hamalek. Like, we don't know who they are. And so we play this game. We don't even know if Haman, right, is quote unquote Amalek. He is, but the word agagi in the text in chapter 3, when he's introduced, doesn't really tell us much, right? In source number 15, we see that Haman is Ben Hamidata, the Agagite, right? Agagi. And in source number 16, you see that Agag is not a sufficient name for the purpose, as many individuals might at different times have borne the same name, Agag, i.e., the fiery one. In Samuel 1, Agag is not the nomen proper, it's not the proper name for the conquered king, but a general name like the kings of Amalek. That's the name of the king of Amalek, as Pharaoh and Avimelech were the kings of Egypt and Gerar. We know nothing of Haman and his father beyond what is said in this book, and all attempts to explain the names are uncertain and beside the mark. So even Haman's Maimonides codifies in source number 17 that since the 7 Canaanite nations no longer exist, the commandment to remove them is no longer applicable, but then also says the mitzvah to obliterate the nation of Amalek remains operative, but we don't know who they are. Rav Soloveitchik wrote, Amalek is more than an extinct nation lost to history. Rather, Amalek represents an internal ideology bent on destroying the Jewish people, but it's not, it's an ideology. What is the ideology of Amalek? Of course, we know on the simplest level, right, a desire to kill us has not gone by the wayside. Genocide seems to be alive and well against the Jewish people these days. But in the ideology of Amalek, there is a numerology. And this numerology is brought in source number 18. Amalek, the letters of the word or of their name, Amalek, equals 240. If you take each letter, 70 plus 40 plus 30 plus 100 equals 240. And Safek, doubt, also equals 240. And so the Rayatz, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson of Chabad writes, the numerical value of the Hebrew letters that spell Amalek is equivalent to that of the letters that spell Safek or doubt. All things holy are certain and absolute, but Amalek is doubt, baseless, irrational doubt that cools the fervor of holiness with nothing more than a cynical shrug. This becomes the teaching of the Sakachava Rebbe, the Shemi Shmuel in source 19, Rabbi Shmuel Bornstein, who wrote Remember what Amalek did to you from the source that we quoted earlier. There is an elucidation of the matter known in the sacred literature that Amalek is oppositional consciousness, which nullifies sacred consciousness. Sheyadua b'sifrei hakodesh Amalek hu das teklipa umevatel es das tekedusha hamavdil ben davar ledavar. He says it nullifies the sacred consciousness which creates duality and separation, as is described in the verse, by divine knowledge, the depths burst apart and the skies distill dew. For this reason, for this teaches that Amalek precedes the revelation of Torah, and its intention was to distract consciousness from a relation extending throughout the earth. I'm not sure about all of this. We could spend time unpacking it, but there's something about Amalek in the rabbinic mind which is cynical, which undermines earnestness, which is the infusion of doubt at a moment of clarity. It is maybe self-doubt. It might be doubt in the venture. This is what I was calling earlier in this class, kind of unholy doubt, the kind of doubt that is that wonders if anything is worth it. It's almost like in the absence of the divine, the doubt about whether God exists, the absence of God in the text of the Purim and in the text of our lives, there is, what's it all worth? It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. And in that way, safek, doubt, and its identity with Amalek becomes kind of obviously not only Amalek, but internal to every human being, right? The corrosive quality of our own suspicions of our motivations, suspicions of our good deeds, right? It becomes a counter, an antidote to taking life and believing that things are worth being done. And you could, I'm sure, put almost anything into that kind of unholy doubt. That's the doubt that source number 20 seems like, I think that is the doubt. That is the well-known adage in Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Gamliel said, "Aseh l'charav, make for yourself a rabbi, v'histalek min safek, and stay away from safek, doubt. Ve'al tarbel aser omadot, and do not make a habit of tithing, by guesswork, by estimates." Amalek here becomes the personification of, I would say, a world where epistemological moorings have been completely undone, where there's nowhere to stand. There is no Mount Sinai or anything to look forward to or to rest in. And in that way, this becomes kind of the larger project of Purim becomes, how do we navigate between the doubt that is fructive, the Esther kind of doubt, and the doubt that is dangerous and corrosive and devolutionary, which is the doubt of Amalek, that kind of doubt. I think when we turn to Haman now, we might have an insight, and then I know that we'll open it up again. But maybe if I could just do a little Haman and then come to openings, Elias, or do you want to? Are there a lot of comments or?
The one thing that I think is kind of there are a lot of comments, but that maybe is before we leave Amalek is this ongoing challenge of both we have to remember Amalek and blot out his name at the same time. That several people have pointed out that is a paradox. And I know that that's like an inherent paradox in the text, but I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Right. So I think that like the simple meaning of the text, of course, is not. I mean, there's no problem in the simple kind of meaning of the text. It's just blot out their name doesn't mean memory. It just means the simple meaning of the text was to kill Amalek, right? That was what it meant to blot their name. And so it actually it's only in the more abstracted idea that it becomes a problem, because then now it's like it's on the level of idea. And so how do you blot out an idea? It keeps it alive. But I think that there's a purpose for Amalek's doubt in the world, right? There is a way that that Amalek's cynicism can be repurposed for the holy. And I think in that way, it's not altogether that different from like doubt more broadly understood. Like the role of like importance of Amalek is right to remember that doubt can become so defining. Skepticism can become so all-consuming that one right that one doesn't actually one becomes a prisoner of Amalek, prisoner of Safek, a prisoner of doubt, and in that way, right, it's closed off. So let's get to I have the final piece, which I think we'll circle back. Um, I kind of like, yeah. There's also like I just want to say like there is a tradition, of course, that Rav Kook writes about this, that we're only commanded to remove the memory of Amalek mitachat hashamayim, from underneath the heavens. And Rav Kook makes a big deal about the possibility of there being above the heavens a place where even Amalek has a purpose in the world that we're not aware of. And it kind of makes that distinction, which is a little bit dangerous, but also kind of like as a mystic and someone who believes that everything God created has some kind of purpose, like Amalek serves some purpose, apparently, according to the mystics in the tradition. Reshit Goyim Amalek, that Amalek is like the mirror of Israel, right? That we're called Reshit also, and that there's something in the rabbinic worldview that is vital about the persistence of both of these elements in the world for some reason. So I don't know, like a bigger class, but I wanted to get to Haman because Haman's like awesome in this story, and I really want you to see Haman and what the rabbis do with Haman. Okay, so Haman, boo, Haman, boo, Haman is part of the question in the Talmud is where do we know Haman from the Torah? Which is itself an amazing question. It's the same question, you know, Haman in the Torah, really? Yeah, Haman's in the Torah, say the rabbis. So if you look at sources 21, 22, and 23, it sets the stage for the rabbinic teaching. In source 21, we right, Vatera Isha, Kitova Eitz Tamachal, V'chitavahu Le'enayim, that we know in the myth of the Garden of Eden, right? That when the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, right? Tavahu la'inayim, like there was an eye. It was desirous of the eyes. V'nechmada eitz tahaskil, and the tree would give you wisdom. She took from the tree, vatikach miperyova tochal, and she took from its fruit and she ate, and she gave it also to her husband, and he ate too. Vayatzmach, right? So this tree, what is this tree? This tree was already from source earlier in the text, right? It was the tree that was beautiful to look at, and it's called the tree of Da Tovara, that it was a tree that knew, good and evil. And so after they eat from the tree of knowing good and evil, it's interesting that in both of these verses there's ocularity. In both of them, the tree has to do with something that the eye sees, but that is deceptive, right? It's good to look at. It's lamar'eh. It's like nice to look at. But in source 23, after they've eaten from the tree, comes God's interrogation. "Vayomer mihi gidecha ki aromata," who told you that you were naked? Hamina eitz asher tziviticha levilti achol mimenu achalta. Did you eat from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? That verse and that little hamin ha'etz is what the rabbis in source 24, when they're speaking about where Esther was in the Torah and where Mordechai is, that's where Haman is in the Torah. Right? They asked him, where do you find Haman in the Torah? And he said, Hamina eitz. Have you eaten from the tree, which I commanded you not to eat? And Hamin is spelled in the same manner as Haman, the same three letters, right? Right? Have you eaten? Is there a reference here to doubt? I would argue that Haman is rooted by the rabbis in the very mythic source of all choices, of all doubt. Is this good? Is it evil? Is it right or is it wrong? Is it right? Is it left? Is it up? Is it down? Is it inside? Is it outside? Haman seems to be, at least rabbinically speaking, right, from the nation of doubt, and he himself is sourced, as it were, in the rabbis' minds, in the world where all choice begins, where all, right, where the fall begins in the mythic mind. We have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so Haman is kind of the source of all choices, the very root cause, the ur text for all choices and uncertainties is rooted in Haman. Haman becomes the archetype of a path that is full of doubt or doubtless actions or suspicious actions, suspect actions. Now, I want to say for a moment that just to underscore how much doubt exists in our texts, because I know that we're going to run out of time, and I generally, I've never taught this group before, so I didn't know if I should load up on texts or I should just speak. I have so much that I want to share with all of you, and I also wanted to hear your voices and see where it's landing and help make things clear. But just want to underscore how much doubt exists on Purim before the final text, which is to bring you back to the doubt can undo doubt, or like the thing and its opposite is really vital. Let's look at some facts about Purim, interesting facts. In the book of Daniel, this is one of the most amazing things. It's clear from the book of Daniel, which is source 32, that there's a river that separates the city Shushan Habirah from the rest of Susha or Shushan, right? There's Shushan, which is a city, and then there, like Washington, D.C., there's the larger city, and then there's the actual capital itself. And so there's a river, and the name of that river is called the River Ulai. Yeah, go look it up. The River Ulai in chapter 8, verse 2 of the book of Daniel has the name of the river that separates Shushan from Shushan Abirah as the Ulai, the maybe or perhaps river. Okay, that's one. Two, there are the there is the only holiday that we have in the tradition that gives you multiple options about which you can have the day of Purim is Purim. Purim itself in the Mishnah and Megillah, first Mishnah in Masechet Megillah says that there were no fewer than the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th day are all options for when Purim would fall. There is no other holiday that gives you 5 options for when you can celebrate the holiday, right? Pretty wild. The Ulai River, 5 options. Not only that, when the rabbis come to codify the core essential mitzvah of Purim, there are 4 mitzvot, there are 4 commandments or 4 practices. And one of them, of course, is the seudah, having a meal. And halachically speaking, there is a chiyuv, there's an obligation that is brought in the Shulchan Aruch and other places that we are to become so intoxicated on Purim, a little bit intoxicated. There's an argument, should we be tipsy or should we drink a lot? But like we're supposed to get to the place where we don't know the difference between Aruch Haman and Baruch Mordechai. Cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordechai, which has the same numerical value, 502. There's a level of uncertainty that is required on Purim. Not only that, there's a well-known teaching that we're not going to go into right now, which is that Purim and Yom Kippur share something, but Purim is even holier than Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur is a day of certainties. I've sinned, I didn't sin, right? There's like holiness, and there's a goat that is holy and a goat that's not. And Purim is a day when those things are mixed together. I just wanted to read this last source to you, um, which I think, if I only taught this, I think it would be worth it. The single point that it seems certain to Descartes is the existence of the self. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I exist. Because even if I am mistaken about everything else, I am still I who is mistaken. So when the great Rene Descartes, who in some ways was the great skeptic, the great, right, doubter of all things, seeking sound footing on which to stand, firm footing on which to stand, wrote, right, I think therefore I am, at least the I is the most certain of things. However, subsequent doubts arose and questioned even this. After all, this argument itself, logical as it may seem, relies on reason, and we have already said that we cannot rely on reason without it deceiving us. In addition, who said that the I who thinks exists? Maybe only thought exists, and so on and so forth. If we follow the doubt to its conclusion, there remains only one singular thing we can entirely be certain about. We can be entirely certain about. This conclusion may seem daunting. Are we condemned to live forever in uncertainty? However, the recognition of the total uncertainty actually empties it of its own content. As long as only certain things are in doubt, we can choose to adhere to our certainties and ignore what is uncertain. But when everything, without exception, is in doubt, doubt itself becomes meaningless. Therefore, in any case, we must live in some way, make choices between possibilities, and make decisions. If nothing is certain, it seems possible to manage even with absolute certainty, simply deciding according to what seems logical, reasonable, and convincing, even if it is not 100% certain. This is similar to the determination of the Torah regarding leprosy. A person who is found with a leprous spot on their skin is unclean. However, if leprosy covers the whole body, the entire body has turned white, then it is pure. When the entire body is affected, the leprosy loses its significance. And similarly, regarding human recognition, when everything is in doubt, doubt itself loses its significance. Therefore, it can be treated as mere background noise, a hum that continuously asks, perhaps not. Like other background noises, it can be ignored unless it strengthens to the point that requires attention. I think Purim is the most remarkable holiday because it invites us to live in a world with radical uncertainty, a world with radical doubt, a world where Hamina eats, Haman, right, is from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And choosing itself involves uncertainty. And in living in a world where God's face is hidden and we look for it behind all of the masks and all the costumes, we use doubt to radically destabilize some of our certainties until it becomes so overwhelming that we begin to doubt doubt itself. When doubt becomes safek in the way of Amalek, where everything is questioned to a point that can become debilitating, that we can't get out of bed in the morning without asking ourselves whether or not what we're hearing is true or not. The practice of Purim is to let it recede after a day, right? Let it recede to the hum, the background noise, so that uncertainty undoes itself, right? That we begin to ask whether or not uncertainty is itself. Why do we give uncertainty so much certainty? Why do we give doubt so much solidity? And in that way, Purim, I think, is remarkably prescient. It's remarkably relevant. It's remarkably important at this moment to be able to find, right, the divine in spite of all of these masks, and to find the holy in spite of all of the resistance to it. I think that itself is that's a remarkably powerful um, capacity. So I'll stop there.
Can you stop sharing your screen just so we can be in
Sure.
conversation? I find that such an important message in this moment where I think many of us are struggling with the kind of onslaught and and I think you really got to that, where how do we get out of bed with all of this uncertainty and doubt? And yet the doubt in and of itself is part of the comfort here. Um, so we do have a fair number of questions, but I know we're over our time. So I'm gonna, if we could, do you have time to go into like
Totally.
110?
Yeah, yeah. I have totally have time. I've
Okay. And I'm getting remarkable teaching. This is great. So would you, there are a couple of people who are bringing up Job, and that does this resonate? Is there a connection between Job and Megillat Esther in terms of the question of doubt and the role of Amalek? Is he an opposer? And I don't know if that's too far aside, but I just thought I'd point out that several of our commentators are feeling those connections.
I think that the question of suffering, Rabbi Eliezer Berkowitz, of blessed memory, the great modern Orthodox theologian, wrote extensively about the Shoah and about suffering, and the notion of God's hiding God's face. Hester Panim is a very important um, kind of framing for suffering itself and for the existence of evil. Um, I think that, I think in that sense, yeah, I think the story of Purim is a story about what happens when we feel God's presence is not with us, and the suffering in our lives. I don't know that, it sounds very Jobian in certain ways. Of course, Job actually suffered in this story. We only had the threat of extinction, but um, yeah, I think that it's a different theology. I think that the theology today is not that God hides God's face and as a punishment, but that God's hidden face is a part of the historical evolution of our own divine practice. That it isn't a hidden face, but as much as a more ubiquitous presence, and more because of God's hiddenness, God is more available in some ways. We're not only locating the divine in the temple or in the holy moment, but at all moments, but hidden and not overt. But yeah, I think that of course, like, the theology of Hester Panim is itself, it doesn't actually agree with this more mystical take. It says there are times when God's presence is hidden. We have to find meaning there, but sometimes it's so thickly hidden and so obscured and so obfuscated that that nothing can get in there. There's a teaching from Rav Nachman of Breslov it, called Torah 63, where he talks about the idea that there's an empty space in the Kabbalistic worldview where God creates the world in an empty space, and that all paradox lives in that empty space. And he
Hmm.
said, in that space, there's nothing but silence. That's the space where all the questions that can't be reconciled, all the Mobius strip of the mind, how is this possible when this is possible? All of those live in that space, but it is inaccessible, he says, by words and language. It's a space only where silence inheres. Uh, so
The
suffering is,
universe of both and.
yes, exactly, exactly.
Um, Everything is turned upside down in the Megillah. Each thing and its opposite. And this commentator feels like this is evoking the teaching that you were pointing to at the beginning with, Esther, the both hidden and public and all of those pieces. Um, is this kind of the oppositional nature of Purim? And I think this was another question that someone else was getting to, is that Yom Kippur, this relationship between Yom Kippur, which is fixed, and this is what we do, and this is is that kind of sense of opposition central to the way we need to consider how we practice Purim, and are we bringing that to our Purim celebration? And is it fair to
Yeah,
say
I
that
think all
we're
of us, I think all
celebrating
of us
now?
are, yeah, I think all of us are Purim Jews. I think there isn't, I think all of us are Purim Jews in the sense that, especially if you're, I mean, honestly, we're through conservative Judaism, right? So I think to some extent, the notion that boundaries are not as clear cut as we think they are, or that labels and language is as precise as we think it is part of what it means to live in a postmodern world. Things shade. I mean, the real world is much more complicated than than the Shulchan Aruch. We need people to come and take an idea and apply it and blend. If you look at Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur service is all about the clarity between the temple precinct and outside the temple. And I mean, our liturgy is so black and white. Yom Kippur is like, we're angels, and Purim says angels. We're a bunch of drunks with masks on, and but in the world of Purim, the saint is not the high priest who wears the 8 garments, but it could be the beggar whom you meet on the street. It could be the person that, it could be anybody, because that hierarchy has broken down, but not only because the hierarchy is in some way that it's something to be lamented that that hierarchy is broken down. The hierarchy was always off. It was kind of an idyllic reality, but it wasn't the truth of our experience, which is that God must be in almost every encounter. It's like before Levinas is a Purim Jew.
Mhm.
Levinas says, Levinas says that if you meet someone's true face, then you are in the you are at Sinai again, right? That's the Holy of Holies. And in some way, Purim is saying the whole world is masks. Your systems are masks. You need them the other 364 days a year. You need all of your religious systems. But Purim says, like, can you at least acknowledge that they are a contrivance? They're constructed. They're a mask itself, right? So let's try to live with that truth in a world where we need language and we need structures and we need religion to tell us right and wrong. But like one day a year, at least acknowledge that it's a bit of a game, right? And and it's a sacred game, it's a holy game, but I love that's what I love. I love that
Love it.
that
I love that we can
element.
have Levinas and RuPaul in the same learning. I want to end by going back to the question that you said, oh, we'll get to that, is, how does Purim redeem us from needing redemption? And then we'll close out for today.
So I can I share I share a chiddush, something that came to me once, and maybe in this room you'll understand what I mean. But so we're told that Haman, that the lottery of Purim took place in Haman, he peeled poor, he kind of threw the lot, and it showed up, and it landed on the month of Adar, and then that was the month in which he decided to enact his horrible genocidal decree. The Midrash takes that story and builds it up and actually expands it and says that really what was going on is this, that on that when he saw that it landed on the month of Adar, he said, "Oh, that's the month in which the Redeemer of the Jewish people, Moses, died, and so therefore it's really not a good month." And the Midrash then says what a fool he was, because he didn't realize that Moses was also born in the month of Adar. And I remember reading that Midrash, and I think it's pretty well known that Moses' birthday is the 7th of Adar, and he dies on the 7th of Adar, right? So the 7th of Adar is, the Midrash says, that's when Moses dies, but Moshe also is born on that same day. So I think that that's the mystery at the heart of the thing and its opposite, right? That the danger of being always in search of redemption is that redemption always needs exile. And to the extent that you are always looking to be redeemed, you will always see your circumstances as either I'm either been redeemed or I'm in exile. I'm either right, either or. And what was remarkable about a lot of Jewish history is that some of the greatest things that we've ever had in our lives as Jews were only possible because we were in exile, right? We wouldn't have the Babylonian Talmud without having been in exile. There is like the reality is that the redemption and the need to be redeemed is it can itself become a source of exile, right? The constant sense that we are not where we're supposed to be, that things are not right, that fuels us to build a better world and can also become the fuel of great dissatisfaction and fundamentally living a life that is unredeemed, right? So in a sense, the balancing act here of Purim and why it's so remarkable, I think the Rambam says that all of the future holidays will be nullified except Purim from the Midrash, and the Rambam codifies it. Because in some sense, Purim says that in the darkest place, you can, right, is where to look for light. In the deepest exile is the place where redemption also can flower. And that for us to not spend all of our time trying to look, right, for that which is right in front of our very eyes, right? That's a little bit of Purim. Like Esther didn't realize that she was wearing the ruby red slippers. And all she had to do
So
was show up, right, with the king and say, you know, that's the wisdom of Oz. Oz is always then, right? The Wizard of Oz. Oh, then we'll be redeemed. But she's walking around with redemption on her feet. And so that's what Purim is trying to say. Right here, right now, be free.
Well, and I think you're 100% pointing to the number one Purim spiel of this year is that everyone's going to be in a Wicked Oz mode. So good job getting that plug in for whoever's congregation is doing it. And Rabbi Ingber, thank you so much for sharing with us in our community. This was really fabulous. I have so many questions. I'll send those to you just so you can see what people were thinking about.
Thank
For
you.
those of you who are still with us, we will be meeting again next Monday with the head of our Biblical Hebrew program, David Moster, and he is going to be sharing a fascinating story about text and how it and in real form, not text in its metaphysical form, but an actual text and its acquisition. And I'm really excited to share his story with you. Thank you again. Hag Sameach, everyone, and
Chag
enjoy your
Sameach.
forum.
Chag Sameach. Thank you, Ali.